Lives Matter.
Black 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 Lives Matter.
Afternoon all. Thank you, LJ, and to all that come before, Christine, Rio. Really, really interesting talks and insights, and we've already got the mind bubbling, as it were.
Yeah, and good morning. My name's Melanie Abrahams. I've been, since around 2017, a mentor to Questlife, and more recently I've been supporting the organisation as an associate curator and working closely with Hadiru on a number of different projects. So the two of us thought that it would be good for us to give an overview of Questlife this morning, and also to welcome your questions. But I think as well, to give you an overview of Questlife, Questlife has been empowering black artists' creativity for a number of years, but this year has been very pivotal in that it received funding but also developed resources to create a large project, ReViVe, which was a pilot held this April and which ran for several weeks. So we'll be talking about ReViVe because at the heart of ReViVe is wellbeing for black creatives, and we think it's such an important issue. But also this is an opportunity as well to also look at Hadiru as a practicing artist himself, because one of the things we're doing within Questlife is we're not just acting within roles to enable black creators, but we're also examining ourselves in terms of our well-being within our team, in terms of if we're developing and fostering well-being as an organisation, as a project team, how are we doing that amongst ourselves? How are we ensuring that we generate moments and occasions of well-being in the way that we work and that we collaborate together, in the way that we evaluate the project, even in terms of the hours and the situations in which it presents ourselves, because many of us in this room will have experienced those aspects of whether it's burnout or exhaustion, which sometimes comes from putting everything into particular projects that you care about, but not necessarily thinking about ourselves. And ourselves and our capacities is at the heart of what we do. So welcome, Hadiru. So I'm going to ask you some gentle questions, and then we'll have a conversation. So firstly, given that you've been around for a while, could you talk about maybe the origin story of ReViVe as a project within Questlife, please?
Yeah, certainly. So the origin of ReViVe, it goes back to the pandemic. Eileen was thinking herself about kind of what sort of space emerged in that pause during the pandemic, and studies were coming out about the disproportionate impact of the pandemic on black people. Number one, in terms of like well-being and health, but also studies came out to say that there was also a disproportionate impact on job security, financial security, particularly amongst black creatives. And that kind of got a spark going in Eileen's mind, and she started to call around and have conversations with black creatives about how they were being affected by what was going on at the time. Obviously the conversation about work and financial security came up, but what also emerged was a wider conversation about well-being, about health, and about identity, about the impact of being in the arts sector as a black creative, the structural challenges of racism, systemic challenges also to do with gender, and what effect those had on people's mental health and physical well-being. And so something kind of like a larger picture kind of emerged that inspired, as is usually the process with how Questlife actually works, inspired a creative response initially. So the first response to those interviews were in the form of kind of like a sort of almost like a radio play, and then some poetry, and that emerged into a production called Dare to Dream, which we piloted early on this year. And then this notion came about, what if we actually had a space where people would come together and not only talk about the challenges they faced during that time, but also have a space to heal, restore, and revive themselves as a result of those challenges faced. So really, the idea for ReViVe was birthed in that moment as a space where people could come together and to kind of like shed all of that stuff, a space to talk about the challenges of being a black person in the creative field, as being a woman in the creative field, being marginalized across all of the intersections of our marginalizations, and then to have a space to restore and revive our creative spirit in a kind of mutually supportive and joyful creative way.
Yeah, thank you. And when we're talking about black creatives, given that we're now in 2023, there's such a sort of variation in terms of what that means, both in terms of generational, intergenerationality, in terms of intersectionality. Like, we're much more aware now of diversity meaning many things more than just race itself. So, and I felt that the ReViVe, the group, in a way reflects some of that. So could you maybe just talk about that in terms of the kind of diversity within the kind of group within ReViVe?
Yeah, that was very much an intention to kind of have it be as wide and open as possible. So the main thing, we wanted people that centered identity and well-being in their work, but beyond that we wanted it to be an intergenerational space. We thought that was really important, first of all, because there's going to be a variety and a difference of experience based on age and based on experience within the creative sector. And, age and experience aren't necessarily linear either. You could be someone who's coming into creativity or pursuing an artistic practice for the first time in your 40s and 50s. You can be someone who's coming straight out of art school as you're 18, 19, 20. But there can be a conversation that could be had across that spectrum that could be mutually beneficial to everyone in the room. And we also wanted to have, a representation across ages, across genders, across work backgrounds, across creative backgrounds, across socioeconomic backgrounds, to have as broad a room as possible. So we weren't really, creating a monolithic idea of what a black creative was, actually a space which exemplified the diversity and difference and complexity even within that category, and within even just in terms of who identifies as black. We wanted it to be a space where it really was talking to people who were of kind of primarily Afro-Caribbean or indigenous background, but ancestrally rooted in the black African or Caribbean experience. Initially also there was conversations about having spaces which are for a wider range of global majority people and people of colour, but especially in the pilot there was a stress on that background as being particularly marginalised and challenged and faced and disproportionately represented in the challenges faced.
Yeah, and there's so much evidence as well that within aspects of kind of mental health and well-being and the kind of institutional provision of that for particularly black people, there's such a disparity in terms of, the kind of over-representation, for example, in mental health institutions, and also the lack of provision. And there are also certain aspects such as schizophrenia, which has been pathologized over decades as well. So I wanted to turn to that kind of intersectionality with regards to you as an artist, because I guess one of the other aspects was that you were all kind of bonding and connecting over quite a range of time, and both you and Eileen Bellow were, who founded Questlife, were holding space, in very kind of generous ways. But you're also yourself a practicing artist. So could you maybe just talk about your practice, just so the audience can know a little bit more of that, and maybe touch upon what maybe came through for you as an artist as well as a member of the team?
Thank you. So in terms of my practice, I'm a writer primarily, a writer and a musician. I'll use the banner artist more fully, but yeah, the main output of my artistic practice is writing and music. So poetry, some prose. Performance-wise, it spans everything from poetry through to rap. I would say just vocalization. A lot of it takes place on stage in a live, improvised sort of way, and my background, performance-wise, is in that. It's improvising with bands, DJs, producers, from everything from ambient music to jazz to dance music to hip hop, all across the spectrum. Also have a bit of experience in kind of theatre and spoken word theatre, and the kind of slower, quieter side of page poetry. So yeah, quite a wide range of work, but all within the realm of words and creativity. So yeah, we're holding space for 8 weeks for a group of black creatives, and I think for me it really just highlighted, well, something I knew within myself is that it's a space that I also need, you know, as a creative, a space that I could see myself and a lot of people in the room in terms of the challenges that they were currently facing, whether they were very material challenges as to like, how do you get funding for the projects you want to pursue, or people talking about the impact of trying to sustain themselves or better themselves as an artist and creative in this country, and its impact on their physical well-being, impact on their mental well-being. It's tough too, because I think a lot of the time your practice is also linked with your sense of self and your value, and so I think when you're having a challenging time sustaining yourself in your artistic practice, whether it's actually just in the act of creativity or to professionalize yourself, there is a kind of intertwining that happens between your own personal sense of self as it pertains to what you do and your personal value of self and how you're valued by the external world, or having that kind of conversation. And so I think that can potentially lead, from myself, can just lead to a kind of existential crisis in terms of your place in the world and the impact on mental health. And so for me, there's an element of support and empowering that I also require for myself, as well as having a desire to uplift and inspire and help other creators through that journey. So entering the space, we wanted to be clear that it was a participatory and a co-creative space, that we went there as the experts who are going to be teaching all those in the room how to kind of like think about, work through and understand their own well-being and aspects of their well-being, but that we were in a space where we were in a room rather where we were holding space and offering space, but we're equally going to be learning from each other in the room and equally trying to build a space where we are self-supporting and self-sustaining space. So yeah, that was really the base of our approach. And I think I was quite transparent even in the early sessions, especially when we had a go around and we were sharing in terms of people's practices. And the first conversations we had in the first 2 sessions, I was always, quick to express when I felt also that I was benefiting greatly from being in that space. I'm very grateful for the presence and contributions of everyone in the room.
Yeah, thanks, Hadiru. And in some ways, I think you're being kind of modest in terms of you're sort of saying that you and Eileen, which I think is a lovely thing, that you didn't present yourself as experts, but it was kind of in a way fostering more of a sort of peer kind of group, but the aspect of holding space and to be able to hold space well takes a lot of energy, but also one could argue it takes an expertise, because there are some people that can't hold anything, you know what I mean, or they'll hold it poorly, because a lot of what's happening in terms of trauma at the moment is to do with spaces not being held, people not being held, the sort of lack of care. So the fact that you did that, I think, is really commendable, but also that you prioritized it. Because there's a quote by Maya Angelou: people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but they'll never forget the way you made them feel. And I think making and fostering an environment where you're making or enabling participants to feel comfortable and heard and to be able to express themselves is really an art, and a skill, but it's also something that one has to sort of embody in that moment to actually do it well, So could you maybe just talk a bit about that aspect of the well-being that you were trying to kind of foster within the spaces themselves, within the everyday kind of interactions or encounters you had?
Number one, I appreciate that that reading and that response. So I think for us, we really wanted to go to build a kind of strong foundation within ourselves, so we can become more resilient in the face of the challenges we face outside in the world. And so we were looking at, well, first of all, like what well-being entailed, and really that's kind of the so I was just drawing a blank. I even had notes for some things. I knew I would. So we're thinking about, say, the environmental, physical, mental, emotional, financial, and spiritual factors that impact health and how you feel about yourself and your life. And those impacts can be material, so really like, food, shelter, etc., as well as kind of having a physical, behavioral, and emotional and psychological impact on everybody in the space. And so really we wanted to have a program which addressed all of those aspects through the week, but also was responsive to the people in the room, to their needs and their wants, and when needed, allow time and space for those, for what emerged in the moment and in the sessions to be held and to be cared for, and for us to model that presence and that care. I think one of the roots actually was quite a kind of spiritual and intuition-based kind of approach. I mean, even from the first session, we were very clear in terms of like having a space where people could bring some objects that represented who they were and where they were at in their creativity, to have those objects in the space, and through that also to set intentions for what they wanted for the program going forward. Often our sessions started with, or exercises were led by kind of work which was reflective, whether visualizations or meditations that encourage people to really tap into their inner well of creativity. Whether that's going all the way back to your inner child, the kind of things that you did before you had any eyes on you, any questions on you. And it was really interesting to hear people talk about doing things and expressing themselves in ways that they hadn't done since they were a child. And for me, in terms of how my also approach to understanding well-being and through creativity, that's a personal thing that I've kind of been exploring also in recent years. And this notion that like I always knew, and that my inner child had the knowledge and had the secret. And sometimes it takes a while to really tap into what our whims and our wills and desires from young, from birth were. So we had a lot of work which encouraged people to get back into that space of really tapping into their inner self, their intuition, the creative world that was within, and to do exercises to use what's gained from exploring that zone, and to kind of like bring yourself forward and understand again where you are in terms of your physical, behavioral, emotional responses today. I don't know if I was answering. I was weaving in different directions.
No, thank you. That's really good. And we want to allow a bit of time for questions. So my last question to you is, so where are things now with the participants that took part, and I know that there's a plan to kind of develop a hub now for ReViVe. Like, what's the sort of future looking like in terms of, and also in relationship to this overarching theme of Black joy? Like, what is being looked forward to?
The initial program was 8 weeks of facilitator workshops, and then towards the end of that we transitioned into a space which was peer-led, and that's continued since. So essentially the peer-led phase of the workshop are participants themselves facilitating sessions and holding space for other people within the cohort. So we created an opportunity within Theatre Delhi where participants could also run workshops for each other and take turns, pair up, deciding, kind of self-led, but facilitated by us. So our intention is to continue to work in that kind of way where participants can feel empowered towards running workshops, holding sessions for other people. We've had the closed group, but we also want to do work which is open to a wider group of people. So as LJ mentioned earlier, we did have a session in this building too, which was a Meet the Funders session with the Arts Council, specifically for Black creators. And we had that room was kind of packed out. It was oversubscribed within 2 days, so we had to kind of cut off the waiting list. Rather, cut off the sign-ups and create a waiting list that was like twice as big as the people who could attend. And because of that demand, we're going to run another session in December. And then next year, we plan to do some more kind of like open, public-facing events for Black and global majority creatives under kind of like ReViVe ethos and philosophy. It's great to also just see participants moving on with their own projects and creativity, Christine included, who's a participant, and just to see the kind of like growth of yourself and your confidence with regards to your podcast and the work that you do is really amazing. To see the artwork that's emerged from people who've been in the space and room, and how the conversations, the influence of other people, the inspiration that's come from the creative assessors. That's something I didn't tap on. So we had, for every session, we had a creative assessor, someone who would respond creatively to what happened in the room. They would listen and participate in the workshop, and then give a creative response, whether that's in the form of drawing, dancing, music, poetry. We had a real kind of range and realm of artistic responses, and found that really did inspire the participants in the room, and gave a kind of, it just showed the power of art to kind of like transmute and to transform what happens conversationally, thought-wise, the power of art to turn, or rather the ability to transmute those things through creativity into something that's beautiful and other. And so I think, based on conversations that have come out after sessions and during sessions when the creative assessor was performing, has also inspired participants to go forward and think about how they can use that art form to communicate the things they're feeling, thinking, etc. So lots of potential for growth in the next phase of ReViVe, whether that's running another closed session for another group of Black creatives next year, as well as these public-facing events. And we're open to it evolving and shifting based on the input from people who have participated. You know, they also have a big role to play in terms of telling us what worked, what didn't work, what they would like and need for the future. And often people talk about knowing somebody who would really benefit from this space, or thinking, this could be really good for this person, or I wish there was more of this for these people and this outcome. So I think it will still grow and evolve based on more input, more conversations from people who have taken part and who've experienced the work that we've done.
Thank you. Let's thank Hadiru and Questlife. Yeah, thank you. Okay. So, any questions? Maybe Hadiru can help me because my glasses. Can help me identify.
I apologise, I missed your initial presentation.
That's okay.
Some of the language you used, as you said, with some of your fellow creatives, was around your pulse and other object that was symbolised where they are in terms of their inner realm. To me, that's a very therapeutic model. You know, I was trained as a psychotherapist, and there's art therapy. So it seems to me that you're using, whether you've trained, that's your background, or you've had other people that have a background within that model of psychotherapy. And also I'm aware that when you on an inner journey and the inner child, there's also the traumatic child, and how you do your safe spaces manage that in terms of catharsis, in terms of trauma. I work in supported housing where we're now embracing a psychological informed environment around trauma of young people who are homeless, who actually have survived challenging childhoods through the trauma that they've experienced. They have a lot of resilience. So, and I appreciate that they're very creative, but their creativity has been marginalised because of their trauma. So I kind of wondered, was that within your background or with your fellow mentors and creatives? It's a good thing because I think it needs to be part of the creative journey. I mean, there was a book I read years ago, and I can't remember what it was called, but you had to actually work with your trauma before you could then be in touch with your creative space.
Yes, indeed. Yeah. Thank you for that. Yeah, reflection. Yeah, indeed. I think a lot of the approaches fall into that art therapy and art therapeutic space, and that was kind of conscious in terms of the approach and practice and the. Okay.
It's called the Artist Way.
Oh yeah, okay. That was I would admit that I've started the Artist Way a couple of times. It's a challenge. I haven't made it all the way through yet, but I intend to one day make it all the way through. Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think there are direct kind of exercise which you also find in the art therapy world. Eileen has had experience, or does have experience of both as a recipient and a practitioner in that field. I myself also as a recipient and facilitator in that kind of realm too, doing kind of work with young black people who are at risk of the mental health, had experience with the mental health and prison system. But I also feel that there is a huge responsibility with doing that kind of work and opening that space and being able to hold that space emotionally and energetically. And I guess that leans to some of what Melanie was saying earlier in terms of the impact also on facilitators and creative workers who are holding space in that kind of way. And there were times during the workshops where we did have a plan for the whole session, but because of what arose and what was happening within the room, the priority was to really keep working through that and to hold space for that. It was also really beautiful to see within the room participants who also had facilitation experience and also had kind of whether it was holistic work or counselling experience, also share, or just life experience actually, also kind of as a circle or contribute to supporting each other through those sorts of processes. So we're very fortunate that was also the case. And we chose our cohort, as I said too, based on the range of experience, and we wanted people who weren't only just experienced as creators but also experienced in that way too. So because we wanted to encourage that peer-led aspect of the session in terms of like people gaining the confidence and being empowered to run sessions for each other, it was really important to have people in the room who had that experience too, and so could share that experience. But an added benefit was when moments like that arose, then other participants could also hold space. It was interesting though, because I think it was maybe after that session, after the 8 weeks had finished, I was in Bristol with a friend of mine and talking to his partner, who is a psychotherapist and also had many years of art therapy experience before it was even really accepted by the mainstream. And she found it interesting that, because I think I was talking about these concerns and these challenges in the space, and she was saying that there's now thinking within the field, and again I'm not an expert within the field, that there is still something to be gained, especially when it comes to the art therapeutic approaches, with just actually not analysing the outcome so much. So to actually just to hold space for to guide somebody through a reflection and artistic response, and just to kind of like leave it there and to leave them just to sit with the artwork and not to therapize the artistic output. So yeah, that's kind of where thinking in the field is at the moment. I'm not an expert in that, but it did allay some of the concerns. But
yeah, and just to briefly add to that, I think things are changing all the time, and it's great that I can see from the way you asked the question, there's a lot of reflection and care perhaps in the way the question was framed. And I think, again, it goes back to that issue, I think, sometimes of where is the care and where is the intention behind this, as opposed to, it's important for people to have the qualifications and the necessary experience, but I think even then, if they don't have the care or the intention, then things can go awry. And I think it's that kind of combination as well of us looking at mind, body, spirit, and the way that things used to be more holistic before they were segmented. You know, so there is this aspect, of course, of making sure that there are protocols in place, but at the same time, we need to sometimes be bridging these gaps and these separations that we seem to be perpetuating, which is often a very Western approach as well. Any other questions? Yeah.
I participated and participating in the ReViVe project, and it's very diverse in terms of the cohort, as you said, mixtures of ages, different types of creativity and experience. And my question would be to you is, what have you found hardest about that? Albeit that that's what you intended and that's what you wanted to create, but what have you learned in terms of what's difficult about trying to manage and meet the needs of that disparate type of cohort and experience?
Interesting. Good question. The challenges there. I think it could be a challenge of time. I always felt that the sessions were too short, and that even though we extended the original program from 6 weeks to 8 weeks, it felt like that wasn't enough time. And with having so many people in the room and so much, in terms of range of experience and ages, you also have a bigger constellation, I guess, of like needs and wants and what people want from it. And there's the desire to maybe meet, as well as to guide people through a program, to also have a space that caters to the needs and wants of everybody in the space. And it can feel like there's not time and space to do it all. And so there's something which is, you don't want to feel like you're leaving people out or people behind as a result of that. And as I said, there were sessions, and too, have been a participant, where certain things came up and felt like, okay, that was the priority. And so I feel like we were trusted by the group to take that forward, and we followed the lead of the group. But then sometimes we kind of felt like, if we had another week on this or more space on that. And I think especially when it came to supporting those who maybe had less experience, to have more focused time on some of the foundational tools that could have supported some of them going forward in terms of like the confidence in leading, etc. So I think maybe that was it for me, that challenge of just not really having as much timing to do all that we desired, but from that we can learn, we can learn about how to build the project going forward, and how to ensure that I wouldn't even call it a failing, because I think it's something that we felt, but again, from the responses, people did also have an understanding of that, and felt that they gained a lot from the space. But I think personally, that's something I found as like a challenge. Even when a session went really well, it will still be the case of like, but there was this thing that we didn't quite, have that time and space for, and we would, bring it back, but there's always more that can be done. And ultimately, 8 weeks just feels like the introduction to something, Yeah.
I sort of feel we're coming to the
Any
end
more
of
for
our
any
time.
more?
Any more?
If no more, then
Yeah, I think we will.
Okay.
Finish. Yeah. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much for
Thank
hearing.
you. Thank you.
Black Lives Matter.
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 Black Lives Matter.